Thank you all for coming to Missouri Amendment 3 from an HR perspective. Quick introduction of myself. My name is Charlie Evans. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Christian County Library. And I also am a SCORE volunteer that I assist with workshop development along with Katie Pattison. SCORE is a nonprofit organization that helps small businesses thrive by offering workshops on any number of business-related topics, such as this one, providing free mentorship, which is the backbone of the organization. If you're needing a business mentor, they can match you with a person with the experience and knowledge to help. If there is not a local mentor, they can help you find a mentor through their nationwide network. The next workshop will be February 22nd at 6 p.m. in person and online. So it'll be hybrid, just like this one. And it will be from Schweitzer Brentwood Library in Springfield. The topic for that one is high involvement planning, engaging your team in the strategic planning process with Tim Dobbins. If you're interested in registering for a workshop or requesting a mentor, head over to score.org/SW Missouri. Today, we have Lynette Weatherford, founder and president of HR Advantage, and John Throckmorton, a senior training consultant with Tomo Drug Testing, to answer a list of common questions about Amendment 3 that will be starting to get underway in February as dispensaries begin to get their licenses to sell recreational marijuana to the public. If you have questions, we ask that you hold them until the end. Virtual attendees can submit them whenever, but they will not be answered till the end. Ready? All right, the first question. With Missouri now having medical and recreational marijuana, what are some things that employers should be thinking about?
You want me to go first? Okay, all right. Lots of discussion on this. And as you know, we've already made it through medical marijuana. And here we are now to recreational. So under federal controlled substances, marijuana is still considered legal. So that's just a blanket. Many people have heard that before. And however, you know, with Missouri passing and Missouri Article 14, it doesn't allow, you know, for the use of marijuana in the workplace or require an employer to allow an employee during work hours, you know, and to use it. So that, just to be clear, so that kind of helps an employer get that mindset of, okay, so under, you know, it's just like alcohol, you know, and you have some certain rights employers do. So just because I hold a card or it's now recreational is legal doesn't mean the workplace is, you know, off limits. So, right. Also, it's best for employers, of course, first and foremost, go to your foundation, go to your policies. And so we always advise, take a look at your existing policies and procedures and see where they stand. Do you already have something in there regarding a legal substance or legal substances or prescription medication? What can and cannot be done during work hours? So that's always a big one. And, you know, obviously using that language as coming to work impaired or under the influence during work hours is a big one to make sure that you're really, really specific, you know, on this. The better, more specifics you have, the better. And then take a look at the job descriptions, you know, too. And we want to hone in, we'll get further down to it, but safety sensitive type positions, really want to be mindful of that. John?
And that really sums it up. There's been a stronger emphasis placed on recognition of potential usage or influence while they're at work. So training of supervisory staff is a key. And having the policy current updated, determining if you fall under any federal testing guidelines, for example, the Department of Transportation. They have some specific guidelines regarding usage and things of that nature. Going back and making sure your policy, as Lynette suggested, really well defines what's considered a safety sensitive position that could be put at risk by not just the usage of marijuana, marijuana, but any type of drug that could inhibit performance and put somebody at risk.
Right. Can an employee smoke, ingest, or otherwise consume marijuana while at work?
Practically, sure. If you get caught, that could be a different story. But that's part of it, under Amendment 3. An employer can prohibit consumption while at work, being at work under the influence. One of the statements we make in our training sessions is just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. And there are prohibitions. So most employers will prohibit the consumption of alcohol while at work. Most employers have certain prohibitions regarding the use of legally prescribed medications while at work. Marijuana would really fall no differently, even though it's not a prescription at this time, and even though it is recreationally legal in Missouri, it is still a Schedule I drug federally. And so it can't be prescribed, and it really isn't legal to ingest it or be at work under the influence.
I have to echo that. And I would say, obviously, make sure that's really clear and spelled out in your workplace policies, because believe me, you're going to be pulling them out. You really are, to refer to.
Can employers still continue to drug test their new hires and current employees?
Yes, yes. However, they're again going to want to review. Most currently you will find as part of the panels, and help me out if this is getting up with your panels, marijuana is going to be included.
And I'll caveat that with some employers can actually remove marijuana from their drug testing panel, and some have. Those that have primarily have done it for pre-employment testing. The driver seems to be, it's hard enough to find employees as it is. They're not going to worry about that, but they then will still leave that on their drug test for, say, what we call reasonable suspicion, post-accident, sometimes random. So what the policy, that's the key. Your policy is, for lack of a better term, your Bible. It's your go-to, it's your base. And if your policy and the practices aren't consistent, it's going to get you in trouble anyways. So.
Who should be trained on policies and practices within the workplace related to substances?
Kind of your jam.
Okay. So a couple different ways I could go. Number one, all employees should be trained and educated on the company's drug and alcohol testing program. They need to know. We suggest that there be some type of educational training that they actually have to sign off on, indicating they've received, acknowledged, and will abide by the company's drug and alcohol testing program. In addition, the supervisors should go through some type of drug and alcohol recognition training. It's actually mandated if an organization has federally covered employees, for example, FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They specifically say that the supervisors of CDL drivers must complete a minimum of 60 minutes of drug recognition training and a minimum of 60 minutes of alcohol recognition training for the purpose of reasonable suspicion. So that is a DOT mandate for all of the different administrations. Some company policies will echo that and have specifics that you have to do that. If a company operates in multiple states, some state regulations require training. For example, Iowa requires at least initially 60 minutes of recognition training for both drugs and alcohol. In addition, they require an hour of annual refresher training. Now, Missouri doesn't have anything like that. Other states, in order to qualify for certain work comp discounts or other considerations, have to submit their people to the training. So it really depends on federal regulations, state regulations, and then company policy, and then making sure the policies are consistently followed.
And absolutely would echo that. It's only going to help support, if there's a case of maybe an employee feels like they've been discriminated against because of this, or the wrongfully terminated by having such training and undergone it, that's only going to support the case, so.
What industries are permitted to prohibit from allowing employees to use such a substance?
Yes, so I know it's kind of a wonky question. I know
Yes.
it is. So I think it's basically like not able to do that. And as John had said, DOT typically, and you may have to elaborate a little bit more, but the Department of Transportation, those that are in a safety sensitive, type position, forklift drivers, those who drive, for business necessity, obviously CDL holders and, cross country, drivers would be permitted to it. We're even finding that this is crossing over into healthcare, construction, things of that sort. Those, maybe medical professionals that are dispensing, prescriptions, and they're responsible for being, very sharp and focused. And, accordingly, some studies have shown that under the use of marijuana, such substance, can't say that, that was a tricky one, that it might cause some impairment or memory or lack of focus or concentration. So that's, so, yeah.
And FMCSA has some specific regulations that say a driver cannot report to duty having used a Schedule I drug. So that's pretty specific and, case document. Safety sensitive positions, a lot of municipalities, their law enforcement, their fire department, things of that nature are going to prohibit their consumption at all. And then sometimes within so many hours of coming to work. So the particular organization, the particular job description, Lynette hit a bunch of them. Manufacturing is another big place where you've got people who are operating pieces of equipment that could put themselves at risk. And one of the education aspects for employees and employers as well is to understand what are the impairing factors associated with the consumption of marijuana, alcohol, how long do those impairing factors potentially last, and how could that really jeopardize the safety of the workplace. And that's the emphasis that we place in the drug and alcohol testing program, is that it's always a safety issue. What could impact a person's ability to safely perform their duty and come away the same way they came in that day and not have been negatively impacted.
That we'll be looking to other states that have already legalized, like maybe some of their policies, hours, and stuff like that.
I don't know if I can speak to.
From what I'm getting, for example, the Association of Missouri Electrical Cooperatives invited the statewide director from Colorado to come in a few years ago to share with them what Colorado has experienced in that particular industry since the inception of legalized marijuana. There's another organization out in that area, it's called the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Report. Took me a while to memorize that. But that particular organization publishes an annual report that documents the impact that legalization has had on various industries throughout a 4-state area in Colorado. So there are things coming out that are showing the impact, but how much they've learned. The big issue, especially with marijuana, is that a lot of the science that we have, say for alcohol testing, we know accumulation and dissipation rates. There's an alcohol testing device that can accurately measure blood alcohol concentration using breath, yada, yada, yada. It's been around for years. None of that is really around with marijuana. There's even questions regarding the duration of impairment. And the best information now that we have comes out of Australia. There's a group down there called the Lambert Initiative for Cannabinoid Therapeutics that's associated with Sydney University that has been studying for about 20 years to try to determine a window of impairment after ingestion. Again, nothing definitive, nothing that's been accepted worldwide, but over 20 years of studies and 80 different studies, they're suggesting that maybe around 3 to 10 hours after ingestion is the typical duration of impairment that people shouldn't drive or operate pieces of equipment. That's their suggestions. When that becomes more definitive, but who knows when that science is going to catch up with us.
Interesting. Are there any devices that may be used by an employer for detecting substance abuse? I believe that you already slightly touched on that, but.
There's 3 primary methods of drug detection used in the workplace. We're most familiar with urine. And the issue with urine is it cannot really determine recency of or when of usage. Marijuana can be detectable for a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months. Saliva testing, which probably has gained in prominence in the last 8 to 10 years, has an average window of detection of maybe 4 to 14 hours after usage. So it is the best indicator that we have of more recent usage, although you cannot still definitively say they used it this many hours ago. And then hair testing, which is more determined a history, and recency of usage is not going to be there with hair. But those are the 3 most common. There are other testing methodologies, but as we learn more with each one of those, we're seeing more and more employers gravitating towards the saliva testing for recency of usage at this time.
Yeah, that's.
Not your
not so much,
expertise.
yeah.
What should an employer do if an employee tests positive for marijuana?
Okay, I will, okay, so this, yeah.
That's your-
yeah,
that's
yeah,
an HR
yeah,
thing.
yeah, this is definitely HR, so again, obviously as HR, we're typically the first, to receive the report, and to typically, we might even contact the testing provider, ask for the medical review officer report if there's been a split specimen, just to see if something may have caused, a certain detection and level of detection, and review, against the job description, and depending on, our policies for it, is this person that tested, are they getting ready to be placed into a safety sensitive position? Are they currently in a safety sensitive? And what do our policies say, on that? Are we supposed to, first offense? Are we supposed to suspend them? Is this a termination? What have you? And so we really, really want to follow, in accordance with that. And oftentimes, what we've seen, just because we're coming off of medical marijuana onto recreational marijuana, a lot of times it was, well, I have a card. Okay, that's fine. That is legal to hold one, but you've now tested. And what is your position? If it's a safety sensitive position, now what? And would we maybe have a conversation, with the provider that prescribed the medication to learn a little bit more, as to when is this taken, when would the person be considered because of the dosage impaired, here's their job description, and really reviewing it, not just writing it off and discounting it. And if that's the case, is there another position that maybe the person could hold that maybe isn't a safety sensitive position, because maybe they have a certain condition, that warrants that, so we don't want to violate any ADA, so.
As far as federal goes, if a, say like a CDL driver or whatever, tests positive for marijuana, it's possible. It's federally illegal, so they must immediately be removed from duty. They cannot perform safety sensitive duties. But that's as far as the federal regulations go. They cannot perform a safety sensitive duty. What their employer-employee relationship, whether or not they're retained in employment, light duty, things of that nature, would default back to the company's what we call drug-free workplace program and that employer-employee relationship. Whether or not they're offered the opportunity to go through an employee assistance program, again, goes back to the company's policy. But the regs say you're removed from duty and you can't drive until you complete this series of processes. Beyond that, DOT doesn't get into the employer-employee relationship.
What type of protections are there for medical marijuana card holders?
We need Jay Preston here.
I know. That's right, that's right.
That's really kind of a legal question. Jay Preston, who's associated with Carnahan and Evans, is an attorney. He and I have co-presented in a couple different situations. And so we'll say up front, I'm not an attorney, I'm not presenting legal, but he said that there could be certain accommodations that have to be looked at if a person has a medical marijuana card. He made a very strong distinction that a qualifying condition for a card and a disability may not necessarily be the same thing. So that's where engaging the services of a good qualified attorney or legal team can help in crafting that wording. And then the HR perspective comes in and says, now you've got to make sure that you're being consistent with your policy and your practices. And that is really a legal question that I'm not qualified to answer, and I can say I can refer you to some people who are.
Right, and yeah, definitely right about that. And, just to have that interactive process with that employee, is this a legitimate card? What is their doctor saying? And we can ask the doctor. I mean, a lot of it kind of falls on the prescribing doctor against the job description and the type of duties that they're going to be performing. And can this safely be done if it's not DOT, with it? But, or is this more of an office type position, not to discount it because there's still some safety measures, of course, but there might be that interactive, and so that way we are covering, all bases with ADA and accommodation and not discriminating in any sort, so.
I'm assuming it'll probably get tested at some point legally.
Yes.
I remember a couple of years ago, you posted something that
Yes.
me, an attorney, and a doctor.
Yes.
And I remember the attorney specifically saying, we won't know until we cross that bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's changed a whole
I
lot.
don't either. I think we're still there, and, as it rolls out, and, history does have a tendency to repeat itself. And what I'm saying is, remember the alcohol, this kind of, was prevalent. We didn't have the testing measures, and I think that it's going to eventually happen, but a lot of it is we're navigating very carefully and making sure that we're being respectful and, just dotting those I's and crossing those T's.
Well, any advice as we close today for employers who have further questions?
Just to reiterate, your policies, your systems, education, with supervisors, and that is going to be very, not to cross over, but that training for reasonable suspicion, I think is going to be really very, very much important. Reviewing your policies again and updating those job descriptions, defining safety sensitive, what the responsibilities, the duties are, and the importance of, staying focused and not being impaired, and just honing in on that. And just being really mindful of these certain medical protections, out there, and how it may relate to certain safety sensitive positions in the Department of Transportation. That's my 2 cents.
Pretty much the same. With the legal teams that we have had conversations with, especially with Amendment 3, if somebody does have a positive test for marijuana and there needs to be discipline, they're going to want to see concerns or documentation that at the time of testing, there were evidences of usage being displayed by the individual. So that's where the reasonable suspicion training is growing significantly, in that in conjunction with your testing methodology to determine potential recency of usage and the potential of being under the influence while at work.
Where would you get reasonable suspicion training from?
Hi. That's my primary role with Tomo. I've been doing that training for over 20 years. So the 3-second infomercial, I can do it.
I see.
And that's as much as the infomercial I'm going to do. We don't try to necessarily promote that, but that is something that we do, are well known for doing that. Thank you for setting me up. This is nice.
I know.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions for our presenters?
I have a number of questions over here, but do you want to go first? Did you?
Sure. So I remember I watched your session at the E-Factory.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was brought up was the use of CBD right now. And how, depending on the manufacturer, how that could sometimes trigger the test result, because maybe the crop ran hot, or maybe the provider of that isn't accurate for their testing. Do we see that still as an issue? You still encounter that during your testing, or is that more of a rarity?
What we'll tell employers and employees is that the use of any type of hemp-based product, whether it be CBD or anything else, will not be looked at as a valid explanation for a positive marijuana test. Currently in the drug testing world, positive for marijuana means a person's positive for delta-9 THC.
Right.
And so if that shows up, the laboratory, the MRO is not really asking how it got there, because it can't be by prescription. If somebody says, well, all I do is use this CBD product, it will still be a positive test. So.
Kind of to piggyback on that, you mentioned Delta 8, and I've seen now that after that training, I've seen more and more businesses that offer that.
Right.
Do you see training expanded to include Delta 8 in the near future? Because I know that while it's weaker potency to the normal, it still has potential for impairment.
We actually bring that up in our training sessions and share about Delta 8, Delta 10, some of the other synthesized versions of THC that are out there.
Mhm.
And the issue that we have to be truthful about is that a person could be showing characteristics of being influenced by marijuana and still potentially pass their drug test.
Right.
Because currently the laboratory is only looking for the delta-9 THC. So if they're using these synthesized versions and that version does not contain enough delta-9, they could pass their drug test.
Right.
And that's an issue. Now, whether or not delta-8 will be added as a standard cannabinoid looked for at the laboratory, some laboratories can currently test for it, they just can't report it out. So until either the feds add more deltas or something different, we're limited in the industry to saying a marijuana positive is a result of the presence of delta-9 THC at a set level or above that.
Thank you.
Yes, great question.
Sure. So we had a question here regarding, Lynette, you were talking about contacting a doctor to get some more information about a medical card, about how HIPAA plays into that, how you could get that information.
Typically, you would have consent from that employee, as the patient holder, but a lot of times you can send the job description, kind of like family medical leave. If you need some additional question, or under ADA, if you're trying to do, how do I do and make a reasonable accommodation, kind of same premise, where we want to demonstrate that doctor, prescribing doctor, has seen the job description and what the safety sensitive elements are being, looked at, and is this truly safe? I mean, as far as the prescription, maybe it's the dosage, maybe they're taking the dosage right after they get off work and it's worn off, for the most part, so they're clear from any impairment or being under the influence.
Okay. And just to expand on that a little bit, is there any role that HIPAA would play in protecting employees in that scenario from sort of releasing that information, the doctor releasing that information?
Well, if the employee's giving permission, typically they're the ones, that's their record, that they want to have the interactive process done. That's doing.
Can I piggyback off that too? So I guess you could, if you're requesting permission from the potential employee to interact with their doctor about that, and they decline, I guess you could use that as a mark to not move forward in the hiring process.
Right. And typically, they've already had a post offer, but they need the pre-employment. I know that's kind of confusing,
Sure.
But okay, congratulations, it's all conditional upon, successful completion. And they say, hey, I'm a medical, that's fine, the medical
Right.
card holder, but we still need to have, everybody has to have it and see what it reads. And then at that point can have that interaction and decide what kind of position, what is their position, you know? And is that something that the company is considering as safety sensitive or Department of Transportation? That's the best way to kind of navigate, you know, for that. And is the company a zero tolerance? Because it can be.
Sure.
It can be. Or are they willing to work with those that do carry, you know, the prescription and or have it in their system? And it's not a concern for them because they're not worried about, you know, the sensitivity of safety or what have you, so.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a number of questions over here from our virtual audience. Is there analysis during testing for marijuana of the level of impairment as there is in alcohol? And if so, is there a legal or agreed upon level of impairment or under the influence? That said, at what point can an employer make a decision to terminate if impairment is disallowed in their policy?
No, that's the issue within our industry. There has been no established level of impairment for marijuana. We know legally across the country, 0.08 or above, you're considered legally impaired by alcohol, disciplinary action, so forth. That has not been established with marijuana, nor is there really a definitive way to test for that. So to say that an employee is at work impaired or under the influence of marijuana is going to be more based upon observable characteristics that could be consistent with usage of that drug. And then, as we said, the testing methodology, the only current means out there is with oral fluid to give a window of detection. That said, there are a number of companies that are trying to develop a marijuana breathalyzer. But as regarding their their defensibility and accuracy and things of that nature, it's just so new out that it could be a while before we actually have something of that nature that would be economical enough for the average employer to use it and have enough behind it to say it's defensible for recent usage.
Just check anything in the room before no? Okay. I have a person asking us to speak on unintentional ingestion. So if they, as an employee, I guess, go to a friend's house and they have CBD brownies, but the person is not told, how that might impact them as an employee.
A positive is a positive is a positive. I had that question recently. If somebody brought a batch of brownies to work and half of them were magic and half of them weren't, and you ate the wrong one and it showed up, that would be a positive test.
And you're still at work.
And you're still, yeah.
Yeah.
No. If it shows up, it will be a positive. And when the medical review officer talks to the individual, they say, well, I had these brownies or whatever at a friend's house, it'll still be a positive. Then it goes back to the employer's policy on how they're going to handle a positive marijuana test. But since it's a Schedule I drug, there is no legitimate medical explanation for the presence of Delta-9 THC. It had to be ingested, and whether what, playing poker with the boys all night long and all the other boys are smoking and the person's not, you know, how long it takes that exposure to actually cause a positive, we don't know. But if it shows up, it'll be a positive test.
If an employer posts a help wanted and clearly states in the post that cannabis users are not welcome to apply, could that be discriminatory towards medicinal patients particularly?
I don't think I would advise posting that, period, you know, with that. You could say pre-employment testing, you know, is followed by it, but I don't recommend putting that specific in it.
Let's see. Sorry, jumping around here a bit. Can you give contact information possibly for an organization or trainer for drug and alcohol impairment recognition. A follow-up question.
I'll let that up to y'all. I mean, you are more than welcome to put out our contact information. And if you don't have it, let me know and I'll be happy to forward it to you to forward on to them.
Sure, I can forward it to that participant. One more here. When cannabis does finally become rescheduled, and it will, this person says, how will all of this change?
I don't know that we can actually answer that. You know, it depends. Do they completely decriminalize it? Do they make it a Schedule 2 or 3 drug that where it actually is prescribed? There's too many different ways you could really go with that. So until something like that happens, the only thing that we will say is that we know in the workplace, marijuana has an impairing factor that could inhibit safe work conduct. And most policies will have a statement that says if you're in this position, that you are prohibited from using anything that could impair your ability to safely perform your duties. So, I mean, it goes back to what we said, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. And though alcohol is completely legal to consume, there are prohibitions regarding the consumption and working or coming to work. So it may be no different than that.
I think I have one more. Did you? Okay. Do you think these changes in the workplace will have an impact on retention issues?
Well, I'm kind of forecasting here. We have seen that just with the labor shortage, that some employers are loosening, with the exception of those that are mandated. You know, if you're federally receiving grants or federally funded, that's usually just a zero time. I have the luxury of doing that. Now, there might be a change in when testing is done. Maybe it's post-accident, maybe it's reasonable suspicion, maybe there's a foregoing of pre-employment testing, depends, you know, on it. But have heard many statements and many employers going, if I tested everybody, we wouldn't have anybody, you know, which is a scary thought. That is a scary thought to think about that. And, you know, you think about those that are driving for business on the road, and would you want their employer to loosen that?
No.
I'm, you know, just saying. And as an employer, if you are an employer and have the responsibility, you know, of employees that do have safety sensitive, you know, positions such as driving or operating a forklift or heavy equipment, and something happens that's terrible, do you want that on your shoulders? So that was really doom and gloom. Sorry.
That's what we got so far here.
Anybody in the room?
So I'm guessing you're right, helping people write a lot of their policies right now.
Yes.
An overabundant amount of people coming out and saying, check this out, let's deal with it.
Yeah, we have to do this and our processes and, you know, job descriptions. You know, we just got off the pandemic with infectious disease, you know, to other things that are coming down the pipe to, you know, having this, which it's our pleasure to help out, but we're getting pretty good at it, you know, so.
I think all of this is about adjusting to a new normal. I know people hate that phrase, especially after COVID, and you guys are preemptively trying to figure out what may or may not happen. But thank you for being here and answering the questions that everybody has had.
Thanks for
It's our
having us.
pleasure.
Yeah.
And Katie, did you put the email? No, you'll send that with it.
Oh, contact info?
Mhm.
Yes. So just for everybody in the room and everybody online, we record this session with our virtual session here, and we do send out the recording to everyone who's registered and anybody who's here today that I will register. So you'll get that recording, and in that will include contact information for Lynette and John if you need to reach out with additional questions.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for being here.